Well, July 29th was Earth Overshoot Day, at least according to the what I call Neo-Malthusian organization Global Footprint Network. And since the 1980s, they are calculating how much of the Earth natural resources humanity sort of uses each year. And according to them, we are right now using 1.75 Earth every year in terms of resource consumption. And so the way they do this is
What do they qualify as as a natural resource?
yeah, so they are looking up something like forest regrowth and soil health and biodiversity and so on, and they are making sort of this index with what they call an ecological footprint. So they calculate how much humans are consuming in terms of quote unquote natural resources, and the details are a bit complex, but so they are then comparing that to how much we use, and then they have as a result that we are overusing the planet as such. And so, as I said, they are indicating that we are using too much of the world's forest. We are deforesting the planet, and the soil erosion problem it gets worse and worse, and we lose a lot of biodiversity. And of course, we emit too much CO2 into the atmosphere, which is also then more than the natural systems can compensate for in terms of CO2 sinks, like forests, for example. And so this is they do this every year, and every year this day moves a little further to January 1st, of course, because we're using more and more resources on the planet. And so former Power Hour guest Mike Schellenberger from Environmental Progress has an interesting Forbes article on this, where he sort of debunks this metric of the ecological footprint on its own battlefield. So he has a paper out from 2013, I believe, where he actually shows that, hey, the forests are getting healthier and the soil quality is getting better. And so we've solved a lot of the alleged problems that we run into with this. And so my take is, yeah, that's true. And it's important to make these points. But you can also see this in a very empirical way, because the Global Footprint Network asserts that richer nations are consuming resources at a higher rate. So, for example, an American will sort of reach the Earth Overshoot Day much earlier in the year than someone living in Cuba, for example, right? And so we know empirically that it's the poor nations that rely on something like wood for energy that run into problems with environmental degradation. They are consuming like a local limited resource like forests or fresh water and so on, and then they have big problems. But in developed nations, actually, we are sort of solving the problems along the way. So we create far more fresh water than we need, and we create far more healthier soils, and we can, shrink the acreage used to feed our populations and so on. So we are sort of solving this. And yeah, that's an important point to make. Of course, it's sort of debunked, but I think it's important to also stress why these neo-Malthusians always get this resource issue wrong. And this is what the reason is, because most people get resources wrong, and so we see this, or most people see this as sort of there's a given a resource stockpile that nature provides us, and it regrows it at a certain rate, and that is sort of a god-given metaphysical fact, and we can change that. We can just take care that we don't overuse it. And this is of course a totally wrong view. As Alex stated in his book The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, we are actually resource creators as humans, at least at a high energy technological civilization. So if you think about certain types of resources like aluminum or genetically modified organisms that we use in modern agriculture, these were not in existence, before the modern era. And so we are creating these technologies and these resources that actually enable us to live independent of these natural cycles of replenishment. So if you think of a primitive society that lives off agricultural land, yeah, if they exhaust their soils, or if they have a problem with using too much water than is replenished naturally, they run into problems. But a modern technological society will create more and more resource abundance by artificial means. So the reason why we are richer and more productive and can actually choose to whether we want to keep a forest area or turn it into an agricultural area, even if we have an increasing population, we can we do this because we become more productive with better technology. And I think this particular ideology portraying humans as these parasites, you know, destroying nature by their lifestyles, is a very dangerous thing, because this is the one of the few things that could actually destroy humanity, right? Because when we restrict our resource use and we stagnate and stop making progress and stop making technology better and more productive, we could actually stagnate to the point where we run out of options. We are doing the same things over and over again, like the renewable ideal, the green ideal would tell us. We're doing the same things over and over, and we stagnate and we don't grow and don't make things better. And then ultimately, we might run into problems like an animal that doesn't have a strategic mindset and cannot adapt to changing conditions out of a sudden. And then we have no option. We don't have the technology to do things differently if we need to. So this is actually a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy to me, where if we follow the leadership of these Malthusian green thinkers, we would actually, destroy ourselves by some resource problem that we otherwise wouldn't have.
I think it's interesting to think about what would happen if we had had the global footprint network giving us guidance in previous eras. So imagine during the Iron Age, when they're just figuring out how to get iron and how to use it. And they say, well, by our current knowledge of iron, this is completely unsustainable. Like we're going to run out of iron at some point. And part of it is when you're starting to develop something, you don't know much about it. And any given stage, you know less than you'll know in the future. So what they're basically saying is that at any with basically no new technology are you going to somehow know, oh well, we can somehow do this indefinitely in the future forever, and every element of it we can do forever in the future. If you have this idea of repetitiveness or repeatability, then you're just not going to do anything. And that's what they're basically saying with new technologies. And you could certainly apply this to solar and wind and the materials in there and just say, yeah, we can't keep doing this because we're going to run out of uh, X, Y, or Z. Or, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up using just primitive technologies that are in what, and this is what they want. I mean, they want us to use primitive technology, and then they want there to be very few of us. And yeah, at a certain point, if there are very few of us and we don't consume much, then yeah, we can live like animals, which is the idea here. So the idea is that humans are animals, and so they judge it as, well, we're just doing these behaviors, and if we project these behaviors repeating in the future, and then that wouldn't be able to work indefinitely, then those behaviors are wrong now, versus the mindset that no, any given group of people should be consuming according to what's best for them now and then in the relevant future. And then part of that is when people are free, then they can either use the methods that people were using 10 years ago, or they can use new methods. And almost always those methods are better, but it may be the case that, well, for certain things, the older methods were better, but there was a limited supply. Like the people who used a lot of bat guano for fertilizer. I mean, maybe that was better in some ways than modern synthetic fertilizer, but still, they had a right to use that. And I think every generation has a right to use the world around them in the way that they think is best for their lives, and then they leave the next generation a whole bunch of knowledge and a whole bunch of wealth that then the next generation can either repeat some of the old ways or use new ways. And that kind of progressive way of life has just been amazing. But it really is the kind of thing where people need to understand what it means to be a human, because if they have this idea of we want to repeat everything and we want to be sustainable in the sense of repeatable, then it, as Stefan mentioned, it can lead to just stagnation, and it can lead to the restriction of the freedom to develop and use the earth. And then if you don't have the freedom to develop the earth, then you really start running out of things.